I know a lot of you Falcons fans are about to get extremely upset with what I'm about to say, but let's be honest. The expectations coming into this year was to win the NFC South and make it to the playoffs. The Atlanta Falcons were a heavy favorite to win this division. And for you to go from being 6-3, the front runner to win this division, possibly being able to win a playoff game, to all of a sudden a month later going on a 4-game losing streak, it raises a lot of questions and concerns about Raheem Morris. Is this dude actually a good head coach? Can he actually get the Falcons to the promised land? Because with his refusal to bench Kirk Cousins, who during this 4-game losing streak has thrown 8 interceptions and 0 touchdowns, it just gives me a lot of skepticism about him, because he already failed the first go around. He was the head coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And also you have a guy who was supposed to be a defensive minded head coach, but yet the worst part of Atlanta's team is their defense. Their pass defense has been giving up big plays in the passing game all year long. Jordan Addison, Jay Jettas, they torched you last week. Sam Darnold, he went off against you. And going into these last couple of games, if the Falcons can't turn their season around and they miss out on the postseason, rather they play Michael Penix or not, I believe firing Raheem Morris is something that has to be on the table, because this was not supposed to be a year where the Falcons were supposed to rebuild. They already did all the rebuilding the previous 3 years that Arthur Smith was the head coach. And you fire Arthur Smith because you believe that you had a team that was good enough to win right now. You don't trade for Matt Judon before the season. You don't go ahead and sign a guy like a Justin Simmons if the belief is that you weren't going to be able to win this division. This was probably the weakest division in the NFL coming into this season, and it still is. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a team that you swept twice, has regained control of first place. And around this time of the season, we start to see teams separate themselves. And the Atlanta Falcons are starting to separate themselves in the worst way, because they look like one of the biggest frauds of this year. Outside of when the Saints started out 2-0 and they were blowing out everybody, you know, you're just along with them. You're in that fraud department as well. Raheem Morris is one of those coaches that when you listen to him talk on the podium, everything he says sounds like gold. You know, he's a guy that can get you motivated, that can get you to believe in the vision. He can get you to believe that the Falcons are going in the right direction. But when you see the product on the field, it's just a completely different story. Jimmy Lake, he has to go. Kirk Cousins, he has to get benched. And yet Raheem Morris has made no adjustments. We keep seeing the same thing transpire with the Falcons week after week as they continue to rack up these losses. And there's not a single game that the Falcons have on their schedule right now that you can say they're guaranteed to win. When you lose to the New Orleans Saints, which at that time, that was the first game that they had their new interim head coach, you know, it's problematic. When you have a quarterback that's just out there, that's a veteran, that has been in this league for a while, that you pay so much money to, he's playing bad, and you just continue to enable him to go out and cost you games, it's on the coaching. I don't see any adjustments. The defense still looks bad week after week. Kirk Cousins is racking up the interceptions. He's thrown more interceptions to the opposing team than he's thrown touchdowns to his teammates. I mean, the Falcons have a talented enough team where making the playoffs is something that definitely was realistic. And not making it to the playoffs is a fireable offense. That's what the expectations were coming into this year. And the Falcons are looking like they're going to be on the outside looking in, because it doesn't look like things are going to get any better. Michael Penix, what was the point of drafting one of the older quarterback prospects that high when you had other positions of need, when you already gave so much money to Kirk Cousins? Now it kind of looks like they made that decision to draft Michael Penix because they had some doubts about Kirk Cousins not being the same player that he once was prior to that Achilles injury last season in Minnesota. And now it looks like their worst fears have come true. And it looks like Raheem Morris and that front office are hesitant to move on from Kirk Cousins because they don't want to show that giving him all that money was a bad decision. But at the end of the day, I'd rather have one of the highest paid backups in the league get to the playoffs than continue to just roll a guy out there just for politics, because that's what Raheem Morris is doing right now. He's politicking. Michael Penix can't be any worse than what Kirk Cousins is right now. And if you're going to tolerate turnovers, you rather tolerate them from your rookie quarterback compared to a guy who's been playing in the NFL for about a decade long now. Turnovers are unacceptable for a guy that has had as much experience as what Kirk Cousins has. That's why when the Indianapolis Colts went back from Joe Flacco to Anthony Richardson, it made a lot of sense because Joe Flacco was not playing efficient football. If you're going to deal with turnovers, you rather have them from your younger player than to have them from a vet. You can understand having a young quarterback throwing a bunch of interceptions because that's what young quarterbacks do. But for a guy like Kirk Cousins that has played so much football to play this bad, it's inexcusable for him to still be starting. And that is a sign that Raheem Morris is not that good of a coach. At this point, I wouldn't put it off the table of the Atlanta Falcons moving on from this dude. I think that they could do much better getting a guy like Ben Johnson. Hell, you should have hired Bill Belichick, but Falcons fans have too much pride to admit that they made a mistake hiring Raheem Morris instead of Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick would have had that defense right. Everywhere Bill Belichick has gone, he's always had elite defense. Look how far off the Patriots defense has dropped off ever since they got rid of Bill Belichick. And Gerard Mayo is a former player. He played on defense. You know, he's a defensive-minded coach. And that defense, every single week, he's criticizing it, saying it's soft, they can't stop the run. Well, they had one of the best run defenses in the NFL last year. And now Bill Belichick is coaching college football now, and yet you're stuck in the same situation that you've been these last couple of years when you had Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith, with how good of a job he's done being the offensive coordinator for the Steelers, it looks like he's going to get another opportunity within the next year or so to get another crack at being a head coach again. And I believe that Arthur Smith should have been given one more year. If you were going to have a season like this occur, you rather do it with Arthur Smith because he could get much more out of a guy like Kirk Cousins, much more out of this offense than what Raheem Morris had. And plus, the defensive coordinator that they had last year, Ryan Nielsen, he did a pretty good job with this Falcons defense in spite of all of the turnovers that Desmond Ridder had. Desmond Ridder was a turnover machine, and you just have a higher turnover machine now that's just more highly compensated than what Desmond Ridder is. And at this point, Kirk Cousins, you could say he's been worse than Desmond Ridder. If the Falcons miss the playoffs, I feel Raheem Morris should be fired because the expectations coming into this year was for this to be a team that not only took advantage of a weak division, but also could not just make it to the playoffs, but also win a playoff game or two. And it would just be a giant disappointment if this season just continues to spiral the way it has these last 4 weeks for Atlanta, and they just completely fall flat on their face, and they end up having another 7-10 or an 8-9 season. You know, it just would be severely disappointing considering the hype that they had coming into this year and when they started out 6-3.